Our next guest is sounding the alarm about AI job losses. He recently introduced a bipartisan bill that would require companies and the federal government to report AI-related job data, including losses to the Labor Department. Joining us right now is Senator Mark Warner. He is a Democrat from Virginia. And Senator, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I know that this is legislation that you're introducing with Josh Hawley, who is a Republican on this. Where does the concern come from? What are you hoping to get at?
Well, the concern is we know AI is going to transform the economy. It's going to eliminate a lot of jobs. It's also going to create some jobs downstream. What we're trying to get at is just some good data. As companies eliminate jobs through AI, they ought to report that. And what I'm particularly concerned about is not so much the elimination, but the fact that entry-level jobs may very quickly disappear. We're already at 9% recent college graduate unemployment. I think that number will go to 25% very shortly. That will have effect not only on those folks getting out of college without a job directly, but their parents who probably finance that education. And one of the things I've been going to the AI community and saying, guys, you know, I will buy it that there'll be new AI jobs created, but it may be a 5-year gap. Help us figure out in the interim, and help pay, by the way, in the interim, for how we do this kind of training for jobs that are AI-centric. And I really want to put it to the AI guys to be part of this, but it all starts with data.
That's what I was getting at, this idea that you report it and then do what? But your plan is you are going to charge who for the training on this? The AI guys.
What I'm saying is this. I'm saying we can go down all of the AI entities who will acknowledge, many of them acknowledge this level of job dislocation. They will say, as everybody on the show says, you know, government will screw it up. Well, I'd say you're right. Well, last time we did a massive job retraining program in the early 90s with Trade Assistance Act, it didn't work. But let's go to the AI community and say, work with us. And frankly, let's put in place this retraining program so that as AI jobs come about, we don't have this level of, particularly coming out of college, job loss. I already know all the big banks are cutting their internship programs. Their hiring's in half. They intend to cut again next year. And my feeling is if we eliminate that front end of the pipeline, how are people ever going to get to that mid-career spot?
Okay, I agree with you on your concern about what happens to entry-level jobs, 100%, but you're already wrapping it up with this idea that and we're going to make you pay to retrain. That makes me think you are, instead of going to be shining light on what's happening with this situation, you are only going to encourage companies to be less honest and less open about what's happening when the answer is, you're going to pay, we're going to tax you, we're going to come at you to make sure we fix this.
No. What I would say is this. You got to start with good data. We don't have any of that data right now. 2, if you go to 25% recent college graduate unemployment levels, this will be the dominant political issue in 26 and 28. I think, and government's response ought to be, how do we actually work with the AI community and say, you know, you guys help us figure out what that job training, retraining program looks like. You know, we clearly, if we go way back in time 3 years ago, and we thought, well, at least everybody ought to be a coder. That didn't end up being the right thing. I really want to get engaged with the AI community, and I've been talking to, we all know the names, I've been talking to a lot of them, how we could design something that would get us through this transition. I accept the fact there may be AI jobs coming down the line, but there's going to be this gap, and I think the AI community ought to have some responsibility on helping us figure this out.
Senator, I think the question that Becky's got into in a very good way is it would be one thing if you said, look, we just need to understand the data and we need everybody to report. And then there's a question of how everyone's going to report, what that's going to look like, who's actually going to track all of this and that and the like. And then there is this question, which Becky went straight to, which you've gone to, which is what does that data effectively get used for? If people ultimately think it's being used for a tax, that's going to be a real quandary. And I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be, and there may be responsibility.
Becky used the word tax. Becky used the word tax. I didn't.
Pay.
I said
you used the word pay.
I said the word. There ought to be a contribution. If you have this much dislocation, and as the our tech friends always say, government, you do this, you'll screw it up.
Right.
Let me grant them that.
A contribution or a mandatory contribution,
design.
which is a tax.
Yeah, listen, let's work through the process. But let's also acknowledge you got 25% recent college graduate unemployment with $50,000, $100,000 in debt, and you don't think that's going to drive
It's 9%. No, I think it's a huge problem. Trust me, I think it's a huge problem as somebody who just had a college student graduate and who has another one coming this year.
Right.
I think it's a huge problem, but I think if you actually want to get at it and want to fix it, trying to work with the industry is probably better than trying to whip them into shape by getting them to do some of these things. And I didn't know about the idea of making them pay for this. That was news to me when you just said it.
My sense is this. They understand what the economy is going to look like better than most. If you don't think they should make some contribution, if they could help design the program, I think it actually, what I'm talking about is a public-private initiative. And frankly, if we go back historically and simply say we're going to have this massive job dislocation and we're going to go back to 1990s solutions, and I think most everybody would acknowledge the Trade Assistance Act grants really didn't work. I'm saying at the front end of this transformation, let's actually engage with the community and see if we can create something together.
So, Senator,
and yes, do I think they should chip in? Yes.
Senator, how should it work? And by the way, in truth, whether the AI community, where a lot of the benefit is ultimately going to go in terms of the profits and the things to them, and maybe they should contribute, the reporting requirement that you're talking about is not just from tech itself. It's from everybody who's engaged in AI. So actually, from their incentive perspective, their incentive actually probably is to report this across the board.
Would you go after the big banks if they are not, like you mentioned the big banks and said that they are cutting their internship programs. If the big banks and some of the other big companies are doing that, do you think they should also contribute to training?
Here's the question. It begs the question around about everything with AI. If there is any contribution, does it come from the entity that uses the AI, the big bank or big any large corporate? Does it come from the large language model? Does it come from the people who provide the chips that are the bullets? Those were at the front end of this. But the idea that this kind of transformation, which is going to happen so quickly, it's accelerating at an extraordinary pace. And I'm not an AI doom scroller. I think AI is going to bring a lot of benefit. But through this period of disruption, I do not think we can simply sit back and say business as usual.
Right. But, Senator, I think to Becky's point, it's an interesting one. And as you're talking about actually the different beneficiaries, we keep saying, well, a lot of the benefits going to accrue to the technology universe. And that's true, perhaps. But if it works the way it's supposed to, it actually should accrue to all of industry. And you should see a sort of huge productivity boom. And if you're a bank or if you're a technology company or pharmaceutical company or what have you, you would like to think that their profits and their profit margins should go up materially, right? So that's what we're talking about. And then the question is, and this gets to the tax issue of how that then gets effectively redistributed, if that's what we're talking about.
What we're talking about is, can we, rather than at the tail end of this, go to the tech community? And I've started these conversations and say, if we accept the premise that if we simply do another government program, it may not work, is there a way for us to jointly work on creating how we get through this transition, which, again, and Becky, as you pointed out, we're at 9% right now, recent college graduate unemployment. I'll take the bet with you if you don't think within 2 years, if we do nothing, we'll be at 25%. And I think that's a big deal, and I think we ought to, not pull our hair out at the end, but actually go to the entities that are creating these new tools and say, how do we make that recent finance grad or even more English grad able to be actually competitive in an AI-driven economy?
Senator, we have to go, but I do have to ask you about the president's executive order overnight saying that he is going to instruct the Justice Department to go after states that are creating their own rules for AI because he thinks it interferes with interstate commerce. Do you agree?
I don't agree. I do think we ought to have a single national with preemption around AI. But if we take away the pressure from the states, Congress will never act. Let's look at the fact we never did anything on social media. If we make that same response on AI and don't put guardrails, I think we'll come to rue that day.